next month, we have a special program, which I know you're going to read about in the Argus, and our speaker is going to be Aurora Jackson from Lane Transit District, the new general manager at Lane Transit District. And our speaker today is from Sponsors. Sponsors is the name of the organization that helps men and women transition from incarceration back into our community. It was founded in 1973 with a group of nuns and community volunteers who sponsored young people coming out just released from prison. It became a little bit more structured later in the 80s with the receipt of a Meyer Memorial Trust grant, which enabled them to hire staff and have their first residential beds. So we know that the drug courts, re-entry courts, and other similar programs are growing across the country because of their effectiveness, but there really aren't any traditional guidelines for those programs, and Sponsors has become kind of a model for those programs because of its long history and its excellent work. Our speaker is Nick Krapser, who's the Deputy Director of Sponsors. Nick is a certified mental health counselor and drug addiction counselor. He works to inspire and encourage meaningful change in people, particularly those with addiction challenges or criminal histories. He's currently working on a PhD in counselor education and supervision, and he asked me not to tell you which school he was working on. But Dorothy Cruikshank knows. So it's a serious topic. I don't mean to make too many jokes about it. So thank you, and welcome, Nick, please.
Any Oregon State fans out here? All right. That's where I'm getting my degree from, is from Oregon State. I had a situation a couple weeks ago where I was driving through downtown Eugene, and when it was nice out, I had the sunroof back in my car, and I had my Oregon State jacket on, and a guy threw a full soda out the window and yelled, "Go Ducks!" So there are some pretty serious Duck fans in Eugene, needless to say. So I would like to start off by saying what an honor it is to be here and to speak to a group of individuals who historically give a voice to those without one. Over the last decade, my career has taken some twists and some turns. After working in a medically managed detox facility, I was recruited to go to work for the Cowlitz Indian tribe in Washington. My work for the tribe took me to jails and to prisons in Southwest Washington to work with incarcerated tribal members. I thought this would be in mental health capacity of sorts, but more often than not, I helped the individuals with things like reading their sentencing paperwork, helping them advocate for themselves, and advocating on their behalf to help practice their spirituality and their tradition. It was quite a sad thing to go into the very first meeting that I had with a Native American man, and he said, "Nick, I just need your help reading this. I can't read." I acquired a tremendous amount of knowledge in the field of mental health and cultural competency for which the university could have never prepared me. I learned a lot about racial disparities, overrepresentation of minorities, socioeconomic injustice, and the lack of qualified and interested people in the field of social justice. But before we jump into this presentation at full speed, I wanted to do a little exercise with everybody, if you guys are all willing. Yeah? Okay. So imagine for a moment the worst thing that you've ever done in your entire life. And you don't have to share that with the person sitting next to you, but think about that for a second. Then imagine that this event precedes you in every aspect of your life. Imagine that each individual that you're about to run into, or that you're about to meet, or an encounter for the very first time knows about this event. Now imagine that event being weighed into every risk or every decision of your life. Whether you get a job, whether you get a house, whether you get an apartment, whether you go into a relationship with somebody, whether or not you meet somebody of the opposite sex. What barriers do you see coming up in your life? So talk amongst yourselves for just a second, and then we'll come back together again as a group. Yeah. So as we all kind of come back together again, I would love to be able to sit and talk about this for a long period of time. I did a presentation not too long ago where I had asked a room full of people, not unlike this one, and somebody had volunteered that they were unfaithful to a spouse and it ruined their relationship. And somebody else volunteered that they actually hit somebody in their car and it was a complete accident, it wasn't their fault, but that it's always followed them throughout their entire life. The person wasn't killed, but they had just, fallen off the sidewalk or whatever into traffic. But there was a lot of things that people talked about that day that could potentially present barriers for the rest of their life if those things indeed happen. So what did you find? Not necessarily the incident, but what did you discuss as potential barriers that could have come up in your life as a result of this event?
We didn't have many.
Didn't have many events?
No, we didn't have many barriers.
Yeah.
It wasn't a barrier.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody run into any barriers? Please.
A young woman that maybe went back to community college to study after being released and wanting to be a teacher, but then facing the reality that maybe she would never be hired.
Yeah. And there are literally millions of people in our country today that face this, that will be judged for the rest of their lives based on something that they did in their past. And so this exercise just kind of helps put things into perspective because, like Phil just said a second ago, we've all done something, maybe not all got caught, right? So this is a little look at, we're going to do a little history on prisons in the United States. So this is by the decades, prisoners by the decades. In 1910, there was approximately 112,000 people in prison, incarcerated across the country. Is everybody able to hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. 112,000. In the 1920s, it dropped a little bit. 1930s, 180,000. 1940s, 273,000. I want to put this in perspective for you. In 1980, the California prison population was 112,300. So the prison population in the entire country in the 1930s was equal to California by itself in the 1980s. So we can look at the growth here. 1950s, 60s, 1970s, then all of a sudden something happened between the 1980s and the 1990s. Do you see the large jump in numbers there? There's a little bit of math, so everybody that's teachers at this table here, please forgive the... So we saw a little 2% decrease, then a 39% jump. But if you think hard enough, you can look back into history and think about some of the events that were happening in that time period that could have increased those numbers or decreased those numbers throughout history, right? But look in the 1990s, 142% increase in prison population. And then a little bit further down the line here, 142% increase in the 1990s. In the 2000s, a 71% increase. Till today, the 2010s, we are at 2.2 million men and women in prison in the United States, which does not include the people that are in jail or the people that are on post-prison supervision or the people that are on probation. 2.2 million individuals in prison. So if from the 1910 to 1990, the average increase was about 20% a year. Had the growth have remained consistent at 20% increase per decade, it would have taken to the year 2065 to reach where we are at today. There's what the hypothetical prison growth would look like if everything was about 20%. 2070s, we would be at about 2.4 million if things were to stay at 20%. But here's something really interesting. Here's crime and incarceration rates. In 1960, the crime and incarceration rate, the crime rate was 3,680 crimes per 100,000 people. Incarceration rate, however, was 97 per 100,000. Then look at 2013. The crime rate actually is less, but the incarceration rate is 492 per 100,000. So while the crime has went down per 100,000, we're actually incarcerating over 5 times the amount of people. So why the growth in the 1990s? And this is a topic that we could talk about probably till the first part of next week. Why in the 1990s? And you heard a lot about it in political debates recently. You've heard a lot about why that growth happened so much. But some of the things that are there that are really not in question, the tough on crime legislation. Many of you are aware of like Measure 11 in the state of Oregon that passed that required mandatory minimum sentencing. Of course, the war on drugs also, which meant mandatory sentences for people that were convicted of drug crimes. And we're going to learn in a few slides what the percentage of people that are actually in prison or that are currently incarcerated for non-violent for drug crimes. Then there were sentence increases on certain kinds of drugs. For instance, crack cocaine carried more of a sentence than cocaine itself did, which was the same exact drug. And then what happened inadvertently was that we were criminalizing addiction instead of treating it like a health problem. Drug dependency, according to the DSM and according to medical professionals, is a health problem. But we're criminalizing drug addiction and putting people in prison. And then something really horrible happened. In essence, being poor became a crime. Because the individuals that were arrested that were taken to jail that had money or had the ability to bail themselves out could get out of jail, go hire themselves an attorney, and fight the case from the outside. Whereas individuals that were in prison or in jail that couldn't afford to bail out stayed in jail and awaited trial from jail and were given a court-appointed attorney. And then individuals with mental health issues or mental illness going to jail or prison instead of getting the much-needed help that they need. And we're going to look at a slide here in a couple of minutes, too, that talks about the huge population of people that are incarcerated that have significant, severe, and persistent mental illness. In fact, the jails and the prisons are the largest treatment providers, the largest mental health facilities in the country today. So a little bit of a national overview. Over 2 million adults are currently in prison in the U.S., which is a 700% increase. There are over 7 million adults that are currently under criminal justice supervision in the United States, so meaning probation or parole. And there, in addition to that, there are 13 million ex-felons in the United States. So approximately 6.5% of the entire adult population, or if we go by gender, 11% of the adult male population, is walking around today with a criminal record. Here's a little chart that illustrates the jails at the bottom, then prisons, then parole, and you see the vast number of people that are on probation. And one of the things that we run into that we can talk about throughout this presentation is this cycle that happens when somebody gets out of jail. They go back to the same environment that got them in jail in the first place, and that environment takes them right back to jail again. And they're involved in this cycle. So probation or parole turns into another incarceration system. I'm sorry that this is going to be hard for people in the back to read. It's hard for me, and I'm like 3 feet from it. But so this wheel on the left, the diagram on the left, shows what local jails in the orange, state prisons in the green, federal prisons in that tiny little greenish area there. But look off to the side here. It says, awaiting trial, not convicted. There are 428,000 people in jail that have not been convicted. When you look at the bottom down there, drugs. There are 237,000 people in prison for drugs. That's nothing else but drugs. That's not a robbery or a burglary or anything else. That's just drugs. Then you have robbery, murder, assault, burglary, public order offenses. And then off to the side over there, you have that kind of hodgepodge, 70,000 juveniles in detention. Almost 71,000. Almost 71,000 kids. Another horrible graph for people in the back. But this graph right here shows what state amongst us in the United States incarcerates the most people. And for those of you who can't see that, that's our friends Georgia at the top there. And at the very bottom is New Hampshire. And Oregon is about dead center at 30 per 1,000. So here's the world incarceration rates. This is a fascinating diagram, and this I knew this was not going to show up good, but I'll just tell you what it says here. So what they've done is they've taken every one of the countries in the United States are in blue down there on the bar, right? And the ones that are in red, they've made every state its own country. Because the rate is so high in the United States, they had to make every state its own country on this graph. So every one of those lines that you see in red are states in the United States, and every one that you see in blue are other countries in the world. And those are our states lined up, with Louisiana on the left at 1,341 per 100,000 people incarcerated. Every one of our 50 states, you can see there's just a tiny little bit of blue amongst the 50 states there on the red. It's turned into a massive industry. Here's another little chart, incarceration rates amongst founding NATO members. The United States leads the way with 716 per 100,000. Look at the next one behind us is 147, the United Kingdom. And Norway at the bottom with 72 per 100,000. So it begs one of two things to happen here. Either we are just a nation full of really horrible people, horrible criminals, or we're doing something very wrong. $65 million, 27% of the U.S. adults possess a criminal record on file with the states. There's the U.S. population over 18 that has a criminal record. Total with state criminal record, and total reduced by state overlap. And these are according to the Bureau of Justice. Most of the stuff that I drew from is from the Bureau of Justice. A little bit about Oregon jails in the year 2014, which is the only available year I could get. 179,332 bookings and releases in county jails, 6,190 of our veterans. 73% male, 26% female. There are 7,734 jail beds total in use in the state of Oregon. Remember what the total population in the 1920s of prison was? $265 million spent in Oregon jails. The releasing population in 2014, 12,004 people were released from the Lane County Jail, which is approximately 1,000 people per month. 549 of which were released from state custody and returned to Lane County. Approximately 50% of the people releasing from state custody are homeless. 50%, half of them. And I would love to see how much of the other half returns to the same bad environment that got them to go to jail or prison in the first place. Like we talked about at the very onset, one of the biggest barriers that we have for those individuals is housing. We talked a little bit about overrepresentation of minorities. African Americans are incarcerated at a rate 6 times that of whites. One in 245 white men, 1 in 96 Latinos, 1 in 41 blacks. 49% of blacks are arrested by age 23. And I've cited this stuff at the bottom if you'd like to go back and take a look and see that for yourself. A black man in the United States is 3.6 times more likely to be incarcerated than a black man in 1993 apartheid South Africa. This one blew me away. 80% of black adult men in Chicago have a criminal history. There are more blacks on correctional supervision today than there were slaves in the 1800s. And this is our country, folks. This is where we live. This is what's going on around us. In the state of Washington, our neighbors to the north, white people are incarcerated at a rate of 393 per 100,000 state population. Blacks are incarcerated at a rate of 2,522 per 100,000 state population, and Hispanics at 527 per 100,000. And this is a quote from Same Crime, More Time. Washington is the third most prolific incarcerator of blacks for drug offenses in the country. Although they make up only 3% of Washington population, 51% of people sent to state prisons for drug offenses are black. A little bit about women in incarceration, which is on the rise substantially. The rate of incarceration for women is increasing at a rate nearly double that of men. And I will tell you that from a person that's worked exclusively with men and worked exclusively for women, the women that go to prison for drug offenses is nothing like the men that go to prison for drug offenses. Women have been coerced into doing what they've done. They've been victims, traumatized. They've dealt with victimization and trauma their entire lives. It's a whole different feeling seeing women in prison than it is seeing men in prison for drug offenses. The number of women in prison increased by 646% between 1980 and 2010, rising from 15,000 to 112,000. The lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for women is 1 in 56, 1 in 19 for black women, 1 in 45 for Hispanic women. And 2/3 of the women in prison are there for nonviolent offenses. Mothers in prison, 62% of incarcerated women are mothers, accounting for a total of 147,000 minor children without their mothers. Women can be shackled during labor in at least 32 states of the 50. Women of color are disproportionately affected. In 2006, 30% of incarcerated women were African American, 16% were Hispanic. Women of color and white women use drugs at about the same rate. But can you see what happened to the arrests and convictions and incarceration? Women in Oregon, Measure 57, will disproportionately affect the incarceration of women for property crimes. There's a little chart that talks about Oregon property crimes versus Oregon violent crimes. The violent crimes are in that orange, yellow. The property crimes are in green. You can see how many people are in prison for property crimes versus how many people are in prison for violent crimes. Another chart illustrating jails, prisons, probation, parole. This information is not hard to find, by the way. It's out there all over the place. 20 years ago, Oregon had a prison population of less than 5,000. And the number that I wrote there, I checked my facts today, and it's actually 16,000, not 14,000. In the past 10 years, Oregon has had one of the fastest growing prison systems in the country. And I think I've illustrated that here. Can you folks see that from over there? There's a list of the prisons in Oregon with a map on the right there that shows where they're located. We have the Oregon State Penitentiary in 1851, Mill Creek 1929, South Fork 1951. If you just kind of not pay attention to the names of the prisons on the left and just look at the dates, look what happens. 1851, approximately 80 years later, another one. Approximately 30 years later, another one. A few years later, 1983 was 20 years later. Then, from 1989 to 1991, there were 6 prisons built in 2 years. So to help out here just a little bit. The ones that are in red were the ones that were built in the 2-year time span. And take a look at where they're at. Powder River Correctional Facility is if I had a pointer, I'd show it's all the way to the right side of the state there, all the way on the east. Columbia River's in Portland. Shutter Creek is down here on the coast in North Bend. Snake River Correctional Institution, Oregon's biggest prison, is on the border in Ontario, Oregon. So taking a look at this map for just a second, something that's not up on the slide here, but it's definitely noteworthy. The prisons in Oregon that hold the most people are on the east side of the mountains. Where we send people from prison are on the west side of the mountains. What do you think that does to a person's support system or visitors? That means that if a person would like to visit their family member in Eastern Oregon, they have to drive over the pass, through the snow, get a hotel room overnight. And we're talking about people that historically can't afford that sort of thing. It's not abnormal for people to come into sponsors that have done 5 and 10 and 15 years in one of those prisons in the eastern side of the state and say they'd not one visit the entire time they were incarcerated, not one. From 1999 to 2007, those are the ones that are in blue. And if you see at the bottom down there, Junction City and White City, there are already places that have broken ground and they're ready to build more. Right now, we have a total of 16,000 prison beds in the state of Oregon, and the Department of Corrections recently petitioned Congress, Oregon legislators to build and break ground on another one. Oregon has the highest rate of individuals over the age of 55 in the country for incarcerated people. The average annual incarceration cost per prisoner, almost $34,000. Average annual cost of care for aging prisoner, $68,000. And if we go back to that map for a second, the majority of those people that are over the age of 55 years old are at Two Rivers Correctional Facility in Umatilla, up there in TRCI. So once again, dealing with the same thing, no visits from family. Here's a little chart that talks about substance use or substance abuse. Those identifying as having a severe addiction is 57% of the population in prison, so over half. Over half of the people that are in prison are there for drug problems and they have a substance abuse problem. Moderate problem at 16%. So we're pushing pretty close to 2/3 of the prison population has a substance abuse problem. When you mix that up with mental health, the prison population mental health problem is over 50%. All the stuff on the right-hand side, their highest need, severe need, moderate need, benefit from treatment, it's over half. Only 22% identified as having no need for treatment. And amongst the women prisoners, 75% have diagnosed mental health disorders. While the crime rate in the United States has went down 24% in the last 10 years, the incarceration rate has went up 14%. We are criminalizing more things than any other country on earth. Anybody heard of the school to prison pipeline? This is a fascinating article. If you want, I'll send you the link for it, but it's on the ACLU website. And for how many people in the room are educators or former educators? Notice any correlation between kids that drop out of school and kids that go to prison? So the zero tolerance policies criminalize infractions. So it takes the power out of the schools and puts it in the hands of truancy officers or police. The push-out trends inadvertently focus on students of color. Students of color, the number 1 and 2 and 3 reasons for missing school: helping the family, watching siblings, and working. Failure to meet educational need increases disengagement, and there's, of course, more harsh penalties for minor misbehaviors. And then when a juvenile does get in trouble and they go to detention, they've missed too much school to get caught back up. And now there are even less places for students with unrecognized or undiagnosed special needs. Our Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, in August 2013 said, "Too many Americans go to too many prisons for far too long, and for no truly good law enforcement reason." We're seeing in the news, and we're seeing President Obama, we're seeing a lot more people pay attention to the fact that this is an epidemic, that this is a huge problem that our country faces. And while they're more interested in putting people in prison, they're very much less interested in what to do when they get out. And the most staggering statistic of all is that 97.9% of the prison population will be released. There's only a very small percentage of the population that will either die in prison or be executed in prison. Over 97% will be released. Released to what? So Sponsors was founded, as was mentioned earlier, by a group of Catholic nuns and community activists in 1973. And what that looked like was these wonderful individuals would just go to the prison in Oregon, because there was only one of them. They would go to prison in Salem, and they would meet these individuals at the gate and bring them back to the community, bring them back to Eugene, and help them get plugged into services. Just a great service. We began providing housing in 1988 at that very house right there that's on the screen that actually Sponsors still has. It's part of the women's program right now. Today, our agency manages 15 buildings on 6 sites with a total of 150 beds. And we're going to talk about the Oaks here in a couple minutes too, which is our new housing project over on between Oak Patch and Acorn Park in West Eugene. That will add another 54 beds of permanent housing to Sponsors. Sponsors' philosophy is pretty simple. Our philosophy is based on the belief that people can and do change, and that a strategic intervention at the appropriate moment can serve as a catalyst in that change. Now, I've been at Sponsors for about 15 months, and what I've seen at Sponsors has just blown me away. I saw a guy come in a couple weeks ago that had spent 15 years in Snake River Correctional Facility in Eastern Oregon, and one of the guys at the front desk had a cell phone in his hand, and he was just staring at his cell phone. And he said, the last time I was out of prison, there was a cord attached to it to the wall. He had no idea how to use the telephone that was given to him. None. Sponsors also really focuses on helping more people for a less period of time than a shorter number of people for a long period of time. We want to get as many people help as possible. Our target populations are people that are releasing from the state or county correctional facility, men and women convicted as adults, and are from moderate to very high risk. And we also want to focus on individuals that have no resources. If they're coming out of prison and they don't have a place to go, that's the ones that we want to focus on, the highest risk, and the ones that have the least amount of resources. So priority populations are people convicted of sex offenses, seniors, which we talked about was number 1 in the country, women with children, veterans, and people with disabilities and mental illnesses. Just as a side note, our facility is full until 2018. People write letters when they get to prison, and they tell us about their expiration date, and they ask for a bed. Until 2018, we're full. We have people that are writing letters up to 2025 when they're releasing from prison. So at Sponsors, we employ the risk-need responsivity model, which means that we use several different types of assessments. They're listed there, the LSCMI, the Eureka, the PHQ, and other specialized assessments that figure out where the area of risk that we need to focus on the most, where the individual is likely to end up reoffending again if they were to reoffend. The Eureka is a stage of change assessment. It really focuses on what stage of change in the change cycle that the individual is in so that we get them plugged into the appropriate services. So we're not trying to put an individual in services that they're not ready for. We identify their top criminogenic risk factors, and we focus on those 2. Here's criminogenic needs: antisocial attitudes, antisocial friends and peers, antisocial personality pattern, family and or marital factors, substance abuse, lack of education, poor employment history, and lack of pro-social leisure activities. All are big. Most of our individuals that we have, the vast majority of individuals that we have that are coming out of Sponsors, have some area in each of those that they need to work on, but there's always an identified top 2. Here's what that chart sort of looks like. Notice up and to the right, top right-hand corner, we have protective factors, and the left we have risk factors. So the biggest protective factors that we've found are stable employment, secure attachment with their family members, and stable housing. So our service delivery is based on the results of that LSCMI that identifies those top criminogenic risk factors. At Sponsors, we provide Reentry Resource Center. which is for anyone in Lane County, not just a sponsor's resident, but for anybody in Lane County that possesses a criminal record, can go into the Reentry Resource Center Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and get help putting a job resume together, or can get help with qualified job leads. We have 2 enormous dry erase boards right when you walk into our facility that have employers in the area that are willing to hire folks, give them a second chance. And it's a good bet for the employers because you have individuals that are being UA'd, that are being case managed, that are living in stable housing. It's a good bet for employers to hire our individuals. We are averaging people between 5 and 7 days to have a job when they get out of prison. 5 to 7 days for a job. The unfortunate part is they're not what we would consider living wage jobs, but they're jobs. And what does that do for an individual's efficacy if they're able to secure a job? We have a mentoring program. I'll give a little special shout out to our mentors that are here today. Our mentoring program pairs people from the community with individuals that are getting released from prison. And like we talked about a little while ago with the cell phone situation, that's really a lot of what happens with mentors. Somebody just says, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me with this? I don't know how to navigate to the DMV. I don't know how to navigate to the DMV. But these individuals don't know how to navigate to the DMV or to the food stamp office. And so mentors help them do that kind of stuff that we might take for granted that we do all the time. There was a study recently done out of New Zealand, and it said this, I can't remember what the statistic was, but it was talking about the huge success that individuals that are mentors have because of the fact that they're in an unpaid capacity. It means so much more to the individual receiving services that individual is volunteering their time. And it took a look at a snapshot of paid mentors versus not paid mentors. And they're both effective, but the number was so much greater for the people that were unpaid mentors because the individual receiving services knows that. They know that you're doing that out of the kindness of your heart. We have cognitive behavioral therapy that's done right on site at sponsors. We have about, I'd say 7 to 10 classes at each location per week, 7 to 10 cognitive behavioral therapy classes by individuals that are certified to teach that curriculum. We provide level 1 and level 2 substance abuse treatment right on site. We contract through one of the local treatment providers that comes to our facility and does cognitive behavioral, or does cognitive-based drug and alcohol dependency treatment right on site. We have veterans housing. We have 10 rooms for veterans. That is paid for out of the GPD program, the Grant Per Diem program. We offer parenting classes on site at the downtown campus, our women's center. We have Parenting Inside Out is a curriculum that we offer, and it's evidence-based, so the probation and parole department approves it. And what we're trying to do is at each of our locations to have an office for a parole and probation officer. And it's not to put fear into residents' minds. What it is instead is to have that extra measure of accountability. And then the U of O partnership between the U of O and sponsors, we offer a legal clinic. Because what's happened with a lot of the individuals, and it's really horribly sad, but a lot of the individuals that have went to prison that have children, they didn't know how to stop their child support from racking up while they were in prison. So the whole time that they're in prison, their child support is racking up, which means that when they get a job, their check is garnished. There's no way for them to have a bank account without it being attached. So the law students over at the U of O come over and help our clients to remedy those situations. What works to reduce victimization? These are fun. These are good statistics. Employment reduces the risk of rearrest by 1% for every day worked. Stable housing, the risk of rearrest increases by 30% for every address change. And treatment, the risk of rearrest is decreased by 2% for every month in treatment. For every dollar invested in prison-based drug and alcohol treatment, there are $6 of public benefit. For every dollar invested in adult basic education, there are $5 return in public benefits. For every dollar invested in youth diversion, there's over $24 return on that investment. Here's the needs, the reentry needs. 95% of people incarcerated will eventually be released. I said a little while ago it's 97%. It's 97%. Over 650,000 people nationally will be released from prison in 2016. 650,000 people will be released this year. And 4,500 people were released from prison in Oregon. And 50% of those are homeless. Here's a little something about college degrees and recidivism. The recidivism rate goes to 14% when a person gets an associate's degree, 6% with a bachelor's, and 0% with a master's. So what does education do for a person's efficacy? Here's a couple of our housing models for people that have been convicted of sex crimes, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is one of the hardest people to house anywhere in the country. So we have transitional housing for individuals convicted of sex offense at our Roosevelt location on Highway 99. So our parenting classes take place at our downtown campus because we can't, having those individuals there, we can't have children present on the property. So we do our parenting classes at the downtown campus. So men are more than welcome to come, they just can't have a sexual conviction on their record to be able to go to those parenting classes. And then the Oaks, that's our conceptualized drawing down there of permanent housing, what the Oaks will look like. Because that's one of the target populations of the Oaks, are people that are hardest to place. There's a couple pictures of our Roosevelt campus. Everybody familiar with where our Roosevelt campus is? Yeah? Imagine walking out of a prison, getting no visits from anybody, and walking into this. We have 78 beds of transitional housing. When a person arrives there from sponsors, their very first day, they're introduced to their case manager. Their case manager sits down and puts together a comprehensive case plan which identifies areas that they need to work on, treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. Then they're introduced to the individuals in the Reentry Resource Center where they can look for a job. And we have got it down to where they just come in, jump on the conveyor belt, go through all of the process, get their treatment that they need, and get out and get a job. One of the things that I'm absolutely the most proud of is that between 65 and 75% of the people that come to sponsors successfully complete our program, which means that they've got a job, they've finished their treatment, and they've got stable housing before they leave sponsors. This is one of our client rooms. Each one of the client rooms have a sink, a refrigerator, a microwave, and a full-size bathroom. That's one of the communal kitchens. So each 10 units has one kitchen. So each 5 units has one kitchen, so 10 people to one kitchen. And there's big refrigerators in there too. So Sponsors is a co-op, meaning that when individuals come into Sponsors from prison, they bring their food stamp card in, and we swipe their food stamp card at the front desk, collect all of everybody's food stamp, and buy food by bulk, and stock the housing units with food for these individuals, because obviously you can purchase more with more money than you can with less. So we have big walk-in refrigerators and freezers, and we supply all the food to the women's program too. We make 3 trips over there a week with food for the women's program, women and children. This is what our honors building looks like. Down there in the bottom is the Reentry Resource Center, the Job Center. Parole and probation is over to this side over here. Each one of our locations have a little fitness center on them, basketball court, because a lot of the individuals while they were locked up in prison got to learn a little bit about fitness, exercising, getting healthy. Our administrative offices and conference rooms. Our executive director purposely chose bright and vibrant colors to make it look like it wasn't gray and dreary like prison was. And we have permanent housing for people that have been convicted of sex offenses. We have 10 units with an on-site manager and a great relationship with parole and probation. They're welcome to come into our property anytime they want. And all of our properties are clean and sober housing. There's our Sponsors Women's Program. We have 28 women. We can hold 28 women and up to 15 children at that property. And then Sponsors Rise, where we have women and children reunifying in a safe environment. That's what Rise stands for. That's what it looks like. So the barriers for unification are different per men and per women. For men, it has to do with loss of parental rights, financial barriers, or they have no minor restrictions. For women, it has to do with completing treatment and other requirements that are overwhelming. Financial stability, self-sufficiency, child care. There's our Parenting Inside Out curriculum that we talked about. And then for those individuals that can successfully complete our transitional program, we have 28 apartments over at the University District that are known as the Quads. It's 4 bedrooms per kitchen and a couple bathrooms. And there's a artist rendering of what the Oaks will look like. If you haven't driven by there, I would encourage you to drive by and take a look because it's going to be absolutely built before too long. It's supposed to be opening March 1st, but it looks like it's going to be done a lot faster than March 1st. Went by yesterday, all the buildings have roofs and siding. It's pretty exciting. It's between Oak Patch and Acorn Park at about 14th. But if you drive by too fast, you'll miss it because right now it's just a tiny little driveway, but pretty soon it'll be beautifully landscaped. The Oaks is a partnership between sponsors and Lane County Housing Authority, Lane County Parole and Probation. We'll have 54 units, total project cost $9 million. Another picture of the Oaks, another picture. 65 to 75% of sponsors' clients have successfully completed the program. That means that they've passed all their drug tests, found and maintained employment or schooling, obtained permanent housing, and maintained compliance with the conditions of their parole. The cost of recidivism. The cost of jail is $135 a day. Cost of prison is $84 a day. Cost of sponsors is $35 a day. There's a picture of our staff. You notice that bald guy in the right-hand corner that you can just see glasses and a head, that's me. Sponsors is a program within a program. We encourage people that were formerly incarcerated to apply for jobs. The expectation is that staff will further their skills in education. To date, sponsors staff have acquired 3 master's degrees, 6 bachelor's degrees, and dozens of associate's degrees. So the next slide is something that I'm pretty proud of. Here's our employee statistics at sponsors. We have 37 employees, 62 of which have arrest records. 16% of the employees came through sponsors, which I think is about 7. I think 7 of us came through sponsors. 138 combined total years in prison of our staff members. 227 combined total years out of prison. And 235 combined total years in recovery from substance abuse. Some faces of reentry. And what you can do, my favorite slide of all. Support legislation designed to reduce dependence on prison beds. Get involved in mentorship. Mentorship is huge and a very small time commitment. People need you. Donations, we accept both monetary and goods. Do you know how hard it is for an individual who's gotten out of prison to get interview clothes? They get released from prison, they have nothing but the clothes on their back when they come to sponsors. We have an entire warehouse, and you can be assured that 100% of what you donate to sponsors goes right back to people that need it at sponsors. One of the things that we need all the time is interview clothes. Anything that's donated that's household goods, anything that comes that's sofas, dressers, anything goes right to the clients for free. When the client's ready to move out on their own, they go to the warehouse, pick out what they want, load it up in the truck, and take it to their new place. Speak to employers about partnerships between sponsors and employers. And support individuals that are trying to turn their lives around. If you'd like any more information, there's my email address and Paul Solomon's email address, and then Andrew Preventure is our mentorship outreach coordinator. And I'm happy to give you guys, I have business cards here too. And I forgot to have you do that earlier. Can you pass that around? That'd be great. And that is absolutely it for me. Thanks for paying attention. Let's have some questions and answers, huh? Thank you.
How far does this spread out? I mean, how far, where does this sponsor thing happen? Just right here? Or?
Yeah, great question. So it's in Eugene. We're only in Eugene right now, but every day, literally every day, we get phone calls from people all over the country trying to duplicate sponsors' model elsewhere because of how effective this is. I am doing a tour next week, the first part of next week, from an individual from Texas. We've done, had governors, we've had politicians, congressmen come to sponsors, just say, how do you do this? Let's do this in our community.
The rise of jail beds has to do with privatization of prisons.
Gosh, I really can't speak to that because Oregon has not done the private prison thing, so I don't know the statistics on that. But I do know that all the stuff that's going on with the closing down of private prisons is going to have a huge effect on.
Is that the plan? Is that in effect
Closing these prisons down? Yeah, it is, absolutely. They're closing them down all over the place. I think it's a federal mandate. I'm not 100% sure, but I think the federal mandate said that they had to close them down. Yeah. We don't. No, they're all Department of Corrections run.
So, here, I'll
What percentage of your income comes from federal government?
What percentage of our,
Money comes from,
a vast majority of our money comes from grants, from federal and from state grants. So we have Department of Justice grants and we have parole and probation grants that we get money from.
There seems to be a trend to insist that everyone who does something wrong sees consequences.
Yeah.
Everything from sexual abuse at the collegiate level or younger, everything. We want responsibility. So how does one assure the population that they are things are resulting in some responsibility, but not locking everybody up?
See, that's another wonderful question. It's a great question because I think that what gives a lot of people comfort is knowing that there's accountability being taken care of. And I think it's become the norm for society for so long that when you don't hold somebody accountable by putting them in prison, it looks like we're trying to hug a thug or something like that. You know, it looks like we're getting loose on crime or something. And in reality, that's not the case, right? We've just had this model that has been so punitive as opposed to other countries that treat mental health as mental health or as chemical dependency as a health problem. And this is something I absolutely stand by. I definitely believe in accountability. I definitely believe that there are certain crimes out there that people should be taken to jail or that people should be put in prison for. I'm not saying to willy-nilly let everybody out on the street, but there's a lot of people in prison that there could be something else done with that would be much more effective.
How are we chosen? I mean, if I signed up to be a mentor, what do I have to go through to be one?
Great question. You guys are awesome. So another great question. So mentors fill out an application and they go to a one-day training, and we have 2 mentorship case managers that interview you. And then on the application, there'll be questions like, what are your interests? What population of people would you not want to work with? What population of people you would want to work with? So let's say that you didn't want to work with any mothers that had children. You just wanted to work with single women. Then you could specify that on your application. Then the mentorship case managers will match you up accordingly. Once you do have a match, and there is somebody they want to match you up with, they'll do like a meet and greet, where you'll have a chance to be with that person and meet with that person and see if there's anything that jumps off the page that's a problem. But we've had to date over 500 successful matches.
Recently in the paper, I've seen a couple of times where someone was arrested for something. They were given 48 hours in jail or 3 days in jail or whatever, and then released on probation. Does that individual ever get involved with sponsors or any other group to try and keep them from doing something similar again? Because probation is really just someone watching to make sure,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Great question. Excellent question. Another excellent question. So yeah, individuals that are on probation that come out of jail for just a couple of days like that, they still can come to sponsors and take advantage of our reentry resource center to find a job, or cognitive behavioral therapy. They can take advantage of all that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, like we mentioned earlier in the presentation, our housing is really specific for people that are getting out of prison that are the hardest to place, that need the most. Their risk and their need is the highest. And what blows politicians away when they come to visit sponsors, what blows them away is we tell them that we have 78 of the quote unquote worst offenders that are in our facility, and we have 1 staff person there watching them, and it's as quiet as could be. It just blows them away. How do you do that? How are you able to do that? Because it's an ironic thing, but when you treat people with respect, they do really well.
Many people feel that it's because of not having the money in the first place. Income seems to be lower and harder to get a job. And I was wondering, Naomi Klein has been promoting the idea of a minimum income like they have in many places of the world.
Yeah.
How do you feel that affects?
That's a-
prison population?
That's another great question, and I really don't feel like I'm qualified to speak to that just because I don't know enough about that. But I would say that definitely income and the disparity amongst people that can't afford to live has a great deal to do with what they do with their extracurricular time. So it would stand to reason that that would definitely have a substantial effect on a person's success.
What are the mental health resources that sponsor has available from the community?
Excellent. Another excellent question. We have a partnership with Lane County Behavioral Health. And to be completely honest, the Affordable Care Act, when the Affordable Care Act rolled out, made things so much easier for people to access mental health services. So we have a person that comes from Lane County Behavioral Health right to sponsors and does mental health right on staff. We also have myself who can supervise counselors. I'm licensed mental health counselor, so I can supervise mental health clinicians in the work that they do with people. We have 6 case managers at the men's facility, 4 of which are licensed counselors. So we do have the ability to be able to walk people through that process. And if they're not able to get the help that they need from sponsors, we definitely can get them connected to ancillary service providers that can do that. Yeah.
How often do you have legislators or prison officials consult with you or visit your program to see if we couldn't change the mindset in prisons?
Great question. The executive director at Sponsors, Paul Solomon, who was originally going to come speak, you just got Nick as a consolation prize, but the original person that was to come and speak today, Paul, is on every committee that you can think of for the Department of Corrections release, for the Public Safety Committee. He's the chair of the Public Safety Coordinating Council in Lane County. He's very much involved in that. And it is a process. It's a language change. It's a culture change. It's a definite shift. It's a mindset, absolutely. And even little things like offender. Why are we calling people what we don't want them to be? We continue to call people offenders. We don't want them to be offenders. So recently, the Department of Corrections has changed the language officially across the board. And it's not a whole lot better, but it's better than offender. It's now adult in custody. Adult in custody. So they call them adults in custody as opposed to offenders. And just a little shift like that can still be a big deal.
Where do people take donations?
Love that question. I love that question. So you can actually go to our website, and if you wanted to donate, there's a big bar, I should say, at the top right-hand corner that says donate now. Or if you actually had donations of goods or clothing or whatever, you just bring it to our administrative offices on Highway 99 and Roosevelt, our main office right there, and we can take it anytime between 8 and 5. We have an enormous warehouse out back. We have a couple just wonderful volunteers that come and sort clothes and put them in categorized by size and by clothing type. And you should just see the look on people's face when they say, yeah, I can have clothes. Yeah, just go help yourself. For free? Yeah, absolutely. Go get your clothes.
Yes, I was recently told of a situation in my neighborhood where 2 elderly sisters have a brother who is 72 and will be released soon in a few months from Arizona he was serving time for pornography, child pornography. And the situation is that they are to house him here in Eugene, and they are not they're not in good health themselves. Mm-hmm. So do you take referrals from other states?
Another fantastic question. Paul gets, and one of the things is, Paul's an amazing person, but one of the great things about him is that he personally responds to every letter that he gets. He personally responds to every letter. And we get approximately 20 to 30 letters a week from people out of state. And because of our funding requirements and our restrictions, and because of the need that we have, we can't take anybody that's not a Lane County resident. So the people that are coming to sponsors are your neighbors already. They're people that were born here. They're people that have lived here their whole life. There are people that got convicted in Lane County and sent to prison from Lane County. We're not just taking people in, anybody that wants to come in off the ship, so to speak. But we are taking people that are residents, that are your neighbors, that are people that went to your schools.
Thank you. I think we did better than a consolation prize. I think we were the winners today. Thank you very much.
Great questions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just going to start the stack right here. You guys can all take one, and I hope there's enough for everybody, but please help yourself. And I have an email address and phone number on there. Please feel free to send me any questions that you have. Email me any questions that you have. I'd be happy to answer anything. I know that was a lot of information in that PowerPoint. It was kind of like getting a small drink of water through a fire hose. But any questions that you have, feel free to email or call. I'd be happy to help. Thank you.